When my husband slapped me at our family gathering for refusing to sign over my tech empire, he thought public humiliation would break me. 3 years later, as he begged for a bailout in my Fortune 500 boardroom, he realized too late exactly who he had tried to destroy. Life has a way of revealing people's true colors in the most spectacular ways. That crisp autumn evening at my in-laws' estate was supposed to be a celebration of family, tradition, and success. The Montgomery family's annual harvest gathering was always an extravagant affair, with the sprawling gardens transformed into a wonderland of twinkling lights, the scent of pumpkin spice and cinnamon hanging in the air, and the sound of classical music drifting through the carefully manicured grounds. I remember adjusting my emerald silk dress, a designer piece that had cost more than my first car, as I watched guests arrive through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the main hall. The dress had been carefully chosen to project the image of success that my husband Marcus always insisted we maintain. Everything in our lives was about image: the right clothes, the right car, the right address. Even our marriage had become more about appearances than substance, though I hadn't fully admitted that to myself yet. My company, Tech Vision Solutions, had just secured its biggest contract to date, a multi-million-dollar deal with a major healthcare provider that would revolutionize patient care systems across the country. It was the kind of success I'd dreamed of since founding the company 6 years ago, the culmination of countless sleepless nights and sacrifices. Marcus had laughed when I first shared my vision of creating innovative healthcare technology solutions. "Stick to what you know, darling," he'd said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Leave the big business decisions to those who understand them." The irony wasn't lost on me that he now couldn't stop talking about our company's success. That evening, I watched him work the room with practiced charm, his perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit and carefully styled salt and pepper hair making him look every bit the successful executive he portrayed himself to be. He moved from group to group, accepting congratulations for TechVision's success as if it were his own achievement, while I stood back, observing the subtle dynamics at play. His family had always been like this, old money wrapped in new ambition. The Montgomerys had built their fortune in real estate generations ago, and now each new family member was expected to contribute to the dynasty in their own way. Marcus had been groomed from birth to take over his father's development company, but recent whispers suggested all was not well in the Montgomery empire. I'd noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he'd been spending more time in his home office, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. "Sarah, darling." My mother-in-law's voice cut through my thoughts. Eleanor Montgomery approached with her usual air of regal authority, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her Hermes scarf artfully draped around her shoulders. "The caterers need your approval on the dessert presentation. Do be a dear and handle that while I greet the Hendersons." It wasn't a request. It never was with Eleanor. Everything was a carefully orchestrated dance of power and control. As I made my way through the growing crowd, I caught snippets of conversation that made my skin prickle. Marcus's cousin Claire, never one to miss an opportunity for drama, was holding court near the grand staircase. "Of course, it's all very impressive," she was saying, her voice carrying just enough to ensure I could hear. "But one has to wonder about the stability of it all. These tech startups can be so volatile." I might have dismissed it as typical family sniping if I hadn't noticed Marcus's father, Richard, watching me with an unusually calculating expression. The Montgomery patriarch rarely paid attention to anything that wasn't directly related to his own interests. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. The evening progressed with the usual mixture of subtle power plays and forced pleasantries that characterized Montgomery family gatherings. I was just beginning to think we might make it through the night without incident when Marcus appeared, at my side, his hand gripping my elbow with unexpected force. "We need to talk," he murmured, his breath hot against my ear. "Now." He steered me toward his father's study, the one room in the house that had always been off limits to anyone outside the immediate family. As we entered, I noticed Richard and Eleanor were already there, along with Marcus's brother Thomas, who was examining something on the massive mahogany desk with great interest. The heavy door clicked shut behind us, and suddenly the warmth of the autumn evening gave way to a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Something in the air had shifted, and I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was about to happen would change everything. Richard Montgomery's study had always felt like a fortress of masculinity, with its dark wood paneling, leather-bound books, and the overwhelming scent of expensive cigars. That night, it felt more like a trap. The antique Tiffany lamp cast shadows that danced across the faces of my husband's family, turning familiar features into masks of barely concealed hostility. Marcus released my elbow and moved to stand beside. His father's desk, adjusting his platinum cufflinks, a nervous habit I'd noticed over our years together. Thomas hadn't looked up from the papers spread before him, but Eleanor had positioned herself near the door, effectively blocking my exit. The choreography of their movements was too perfect to be coincidental. "Sarah," Richard began, his voice carrying that particular tone he reserved for business negotiations. "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the future of Tech Vision." He lifted a crystal tumbler of scotch to his lips, the amber liquid catching the lamplight. "The family has concerns." I felt my spine stiffen. "The family?" I kept my voice steady, professional. "I wasn't aware the family had any stake in my company." "That's precisely the problem," Eleanor interjected, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the leather arm of her chair. "This notion of your company has become rather problematic." Thomas finally looked up from his papers, pushing a document across the desk toward me. "We've drawn up a reasonable proposal. Given the current market conditions and considering the family's interests, we believe transferring ownership of Tech Vision to Montgomery Holdings would be the most prudent course of action." The document before me was a transfer of ownership agreement, already bearing Marcus's signature. My husband, the man who had sworn to stand by my side through everything, had signed away my life's work without a moment's hesitation. "This is absurd," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Tech Vision is my company. I built it from nothing. The Montgomery family has no claim to it." Marcus stepped forward, his expression a mixture of condescension and false concern. "Darling, be reasonable. The healthcare industry is volatile. You've had an impressive run, but it's time to let professionals handle things. The family can protect what you've built, expand it properly." "Protect it?" I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in the sound. "You mean strip it for parts to save your failing real estate empire?" The slight flinch in Richard's expression confirmed my suspicion. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? Montgomery Holdings is in trouble, and you want to use my success to bail you out." Eleanor's face hardened. "Mind your tone, Sarah. Remember who welcomed you into this family, gave you the connections that made your little venture possible in the first place." "My tone?" I turned to face her fully. "You mean the tone of someone watching their family try to steal their life's work? Those connections you're so proud of? I never used them. Not once. Every contract, every deal, every success was earned. Through my own merit." "Merit?" Marcus scoffed, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "You really believe you did this all on your own? That the Montgomery name had nothing to do with your success? Sign the papers, Sarah. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I picked up the document, examining it with deliberate slowness before tearing it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed through the study like a gunshot. No. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Marcus's face contorted with rage, his hand rising and falling in one fluid motion. The force of his slap sent me stumbling backward, the torn papers floating to the ground like fallen leaves. The sharp sting of the blow was nothing compared to the cold realization that none of them, not my husband, not his parents, not his brother, showed any sign of shock or disapproval at his action. "You ungrateful bitch," he spat, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By destroying the family?" I straightened slowly, tasting blood where my lip had split. The room had gone deadly quiet, the only sound the gentle ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. In that moment, looking at these people, who had claimed to be my family, I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental change in the way I viewed not just them, but myself. "Thank you," I said softly, touching my fingertips to my bleeding lip. "What?" Marcus looked confused, his anger momentarily derailed by my unexpected response. "Thank you for finally showing me exactly who you are. All of you." I turned to Bad, face each of them in turn. "You've made what comes next so much easier." With that, I walked to the door, Eleanor stepping aside almost involuntarily. As I reached for the handle, Richard's voice stopped me. "If you walk out that door, you're walking away from everything. The family, the connections, all of it. You'll have nothing." I smiled, though they couldn't see it with my back turned. "No, Richard. I'll have everything that matters. And you? You'll never see it coming." The autumn air hit my face like a slap as I emerged from the study, the gentle music and laughter from the gathering now seeming grotesque in its artificiality. My heels clicked against the marble flooring, each step echoing with a finality that felt appropriate for the moment. Everything had changed, yet the party continued as if nothing had happened. Crystal glasses clinked, fake laughter tinkled, and the orchestra played on. I could feel the eyes following me, the curious glances, the whispered conversations. News traveled fast in the Montgomery circle, and I had no doubt that within minutes, everyone would know what had transpired. In Richard's study, Claire, ever the opportunist, was already on her phone, no doubt spreading the word with carefully crafted dramatic flair. As I reached the grand staircase, I heard Marcus's voice behind me, loud enough to ensure an audience. "Sarah, don't be dramatic. Come back here and let's discuss this like adults." His tone was perfectly calibrated, reasonable, controlled, making me appear to be the irrational one. It was a technique I'd watched him use in countless business negotiations, but I'd never been on the receiving end until now. I turned slowly, aware that the music had quieted and conversations had hushed. The split in my lip had stopped bleeding, but I could feel it swelling. Marcus stood at the top of the stairs, flanked by his parents and brother, the perfect picture of family unity. Behind them, guests pretended not to watch while drinking in every detail. "Like adults?" I repeated, my voice carrying clearly through the now silent room. "Was it adult-like to try to steal my company? Or perhaps you mean the adult-like way you hit me when I refused to sign it over?" A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Eleanor stepped forward, her social training kicking in to manage the situation. "Sarah, dear, you're obviously upset. These family matters are better discussed in private." "Family matters?" I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Let's talk about family, Eleanor. Let's discuss how your son married me believing he could eventually take control of any success I might achieve. Or how about we discuss the fact that Montgomery Holdings is failing, and instead of admitting defeat, you thought you could simply take what I built." Richard's face had turned an interesting shade of purple. "That's enough," he thundered. But for the first time in 15 years, his authoritative voice had no effect on me. "You're right, Richard. It is enough." I reached up and removed my wedding ring, the platinum band that had once symbolized love and commitment now feeling like a shackle. "I've had enough of the manipulation, the lies, and the thinly veiled contempt. You all thought I was nothing without the Montgomery name? Watch me." I dropped the ring, letting it bounce down the marble stairs with a series of metallic pings that seemed to punctuate my words. The sound of it rolling across the floor was deafening in the silence that had fallen over the gathering. Marcus started down the stairs, his face a mask of controlled rage. "If you do this, you'll regret it. We made you who you are. Without us, you're nothing but a small-time tech developer with delusions of grandeur." I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle him more than anger would have. "No, Marcus, you never made me anything. You just made me stronger by trying to break me." I turned to address the watching crowd. "I hope you've all enjoyed the show. Consider this my final performance as a Montgomery." As I walked toward the front door, I heard Eleanor's sharp voice. "If you leave now, don't expect to ever be welcomed back." The Montgomery family doesn't forgive betrayal. I paused with my hand on the door handle. Betrayal? How interesting that you see it that way. But then, people who are used to taking what they want rarely understand when someone refuses to give it to them. I pushed open the heavy oak door, letting the cool night air rush in. "Oh, and Eleanor, I'd start looking for a good crisis management team. You're going to need one." The door closed behind me with a satisfying thud, cutting off the burst of shocked conversations that had erupted in my wake. The circular driveway was lined with luxury cars, Bentleys, Maseratis, and Mercedes, that had seemed so important just hours ago. Now they just looked like expensive shells, much like the family I was leaving behind. My own car, a car I had bought with my own money, despite Marcus's insistence on using one of the family's vehicles, sat at the end of the drive. As I walked toward it, my phone began buzzing with incoming messages and calls. I pulled it out and saw Marcus's name flashing on the screen. Without hesitation, I dropped the phone into one of the ornamental fountains that flanked the driveway. The security guard at the gate, a man who had watched me come and go for 15 years, seemed unsure whether to open it for me. I saw him glance toward the house, presumably waiting for instructions. I stepped out of my car and walked to his booth. "Mr. Montgomery might not want," he began, but I cut him off. "I'm not a Montgomery anymore, James, and this is the last time you'll ever have to open this gate for me." Something in my voice must have convinced him, because the massive iron gates began to swing open. As I drove through them for the final time, I caught a glimpse of the mansion in my rearview mirror, a fortress of wealth and privilege that had held me captive for far too long. The split in my lip throbbed, a physical reminder of the price of freedom. But as I accelerated onto the main road, leaving behind the manicured lawns and carefully cultivated image of perfection, I felt something unexpected: relief. They had shown their true colors, revealed their ultimate plan, and in doing so they had freed me from any lingering doubts or obligations. Now it was time to show them exactly who they had underestimated. The first night of freedom felt anything but liberating. I drove aimlessly through the city's rain-slicked streets, the neon lights blurring through my windshield as I processed the enormity of what had just happened. My face throbbed where Marcus had struck me, a constant reminder of how quickly 15 years of marriage could crumble into violence and betrayal. I pulled into the parking lot of the Four Seasons, the last place the Montgomerys would expect to find me. They'd be watching my apartment, the office, even my parents' house in Connecticut. But they'd never think to look at a hotel less than 2 miles from their estate. The Montgomerys didn't believe in hiding in plain sight. Their worldview was too wrapped up in grand gestures and power moves to consider simplicity. The concierge didn't blink at my appearance: split lip, smeared mascara, and evening gown at midnight. In the world of luxury hotels, discretion was worth more than curiosity. As I swiped my corporate card, I realized it might be the last time I could use it. No doubt Marcus was already moving to freeze my accounts, both personal and professional. The suite felt vast and empty, its luxury a hollow echo of the life I'd just left behind. I kicked off my heels and walked to the window, staring out at the city that had been my home for the past 15 years. Somewhere out there, the Montgomery family was already working to destroy everything I'd built. My phone lay at the bottom of their fountain, but I knew what would be happening. Marcus would be calling emergency board meetings, contacting our major clients, spinning a story about my emotional instability and reckless business decisions. Richard would be activating his network of business contacts, ensuring that doors would close before I could even reach for their handles. Eleanor would be handling the social fallout, hosting intimate dinners where she'd sadly explain how I'd lost my way and how the family had tried everything to help. I pulled my laptop from my purse. Thankfully, I'd started carrying it everywhere since noticing Marcus's strange behavior weeks ago. Opening it, I began to type, my fingers flying across the keyboard as I documented everything that had happened. In Richard's study. Every word, every threat, every moment leading up to Marcus's violence. When I finished, I sent the account to my private email server, one that Marcus didn't know existed. Next, I logged into TechVision's secure system. As expected, multiple login attempts had already been made from Marcus's IP address. He'd never bothered to learn the technical side of my business, always dismissing it as beneath him. Now that, arrogance would cost him. I quickly initiated the emergency protocols I'd built into the system years ago, not out of suspicion, but out of the same meticulous attention to detail that had helped me build TechVision in the first place. Within minutes, all critical data was backed up to secure servers. Access codes were changed, and key employees were notified of an emergency protocol activation. A separate email went out to my most trusted team members, people I'd hired, myself, whose loyalty was to the company rather than the Montgomery name. The sun was rising by the time I finished, casting long shadows across the hotel room. My body ached from tension, and my mind raced with all the things I still needed to do. But beneath the exhaustion and pain, something else was building. A cold, clear certainty about what came next. I ordered room service, coffee, and a light breakfast I couldn't taste, and opened my laptop again. This time, I navigated to a folder I'd created months ago when I first noticed the signs of trouble in Marcus's behavior. Inside were carefully documented records, suspicious transfers from Montgomery Holdings, attempted access to TechVision's proprietary information, emails and meeting notes that painted a clear picture of premeditation. I hadn't known exactly what they were planning, but I'd known something was coming. The Montgomerys had taught me well, perhaps too well, about the importance of always being prepared for betrayal. They just never expected me to apply those lessons to them. My phone had automated every critical notification to my laptop, so I watched as the messages rolled in. Marcus had indeed called an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. Richard was already reaching out to our major investors. Eleanor had begun her social media campaign, posting a cryptic message about keeping the family in her prayers during this difficult time. But they had underestimated two critical factors. First, TechVision's success wasn't built on the Montgomery name. It was built on revolutionary healthcare technology that our clients couldn't easily replace. Second, I had spent years building relationships with our partners based on trust and results, not social connections and old money. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. For a moment, my heart raced. Had they found me already? But it was just the hotel manager, personally delivering a package that had been sent to my attention. Inside was a burner phone and a business card from Diana Chen, one of Silicon Valley's most ruthless corporate lawyers. A handwritten note accompanied it. "I've been waiting for your call. Time to show them what real power looks like." I smiled, remembering the lunch Diana and I had shared 6 months ago, when she'd warned me about rumors of Montgomery Holdings' financial troubles. She'd seen through the family's facade then, recognizing in me a kindred spirit, someone else who'd built something real in a world of smoke and mirrors. Picking up the burner phone, I dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "They finally showed their hand?" she asked without preamble. "Yes." "And you're ready to fight back?" I touched my split lip, feeling the swelling that would serve as a reminder of this night for days to come. "They tried to take everything from me, Diana. Now I'm going to show them exactly what that feels like." "Good," she replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Let's get to work." The next 48 hours unfolded like a high-stakes chess match. I moved into a suite at the Four Seasons competitor hotel, knowing the Montgomerys would eventually think to check their preferred establishments. Diana had arranged for a team of private security professionals to sweep my new temporary residence for surveillance devices and establish secure communications protocols. The morning after the confrontation, I watched the business news coverage from my laptop. As expected, Montgomery Holdings had issued a press release expressing deep concern about the leadership situation at TechVision. The financial markets responded with predictable nervousness, our stock price dipping as speculation ran wild about internal power struggles and management instability. "Let them play their game," Diana advised during our morning strategy session. She sat across from me at the suite's dining table, her sharp features reflected in the screen of her tablet as she reviewed documentation. "They're following an outdated playbook, one that worked when business was conducted in country clubs and boardrooms. They don't understand that real power in today's world lies in innovation and actual results." She was right. While Marcus and his family were busy attempting to leverage their social connections, I was focusing on what really mattered. My core team at TechVision, the brilliant minds who had helped build our revolutionary healthcare systems, had received my emergency protocols and responded exactly as I'd hoped. By noon, our chief technology officer had secured all our proprietary technology and intellectual property. Our lead developer had implemented additional security measures I'd designed months ago, effectively locking the Montgomerys out of our most critical systems. "Ms. Carter?" My new assistant, hired by Diana from a specialist agency, appeared with a fresh stack of documents. "The preliminary injunction papers are ready for your review, and Dr. Patel is on a secure line." Dr. Patel's call was crucial. As the head of research at one of the country's largest hospital networks, she had been instrumental in helping us develop our patient care systems. More importantly, she had become a friend over years of collaboration, one of the few real friendships I'd maintained despite the Montgomerys' attempts to isolate me within their social circle. "Sarah," her familiar voice came through clearly on the secure line. "I've been trying to reach you since I heard the news. Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Priya," I assured her, though my still swollen lip suggested otherwise. "But I need to know where you stand. The Montgomerys will be reaching out to all our major partners if they haven't already." There was no hesitation in her response. "They already did. Richard Montgomery himself called this morning, trying to convince me that the company would be in better hands under their management." She paused, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "I told him that our partnership is with you and your team, not with his family's holding company. We've seen the results of your work, Sarah. Our patient outcomes have improved by 30% since implementing your systems. The board won't throw that away because of some family power play." Relief flooded through me. Dr. Patel's support meant more than just maintaining one client relationship. Her influence in the healthcare sector would help others stand firm against the Montgomerys' pressure tactics. By late afternoon, Diana had arranged a virtual meeting with TechVision's board of directors. The Montgomerys had stacked the board with their allies over the years, but they'd never gained a majority, another detail that my husband had dismissed as unimportant. Now, facing the choice between backing a proven innovator and siding with a failing real estate empire, even their loyalists were wavering. "The numbers don't lie," I told the board, my voice steady as I presented our latest performance data. "TechVision's value comes from our technology and our team, not from any family name or social connections. The attempt to forcibly transfer ownership to Montgomery Holdings wasn't just illegal, it was a desperate move that would have destroyed everything we've built. One of Marcus's oldest friends on the board leaned forward, his expression troubled. "Sarah, we've known each other for years. Are you sure you're not letting personal issues cloud your judgment? The Montgomerys have significant experience in managing large corporations." I shared my screen, displaying Montgomery Holdings' confidential financial reports, documents that Marcus had carelessly left accessible on our home network. "Experience in running companies into the ground, you mean? Montgomery Holdings is hemorrhaging money. Their last 3 major projects have failed, and they're leveraged to the hilt. They don't want to manage Tech Vision. They want to strip it for assets to save their failing empire." The silence that followed was deafening. Board members exchanged glances, reality sinking in. Even Marcus's supporters couldn't argue with the stark financial evidence before them. I moved to reject any proposed transfer of ownership. Dr. Williams, our lead independent director, finally spoke. "And I suggest we issue an immediate statement of confidence in current management." The vote was unanimous. As I ended the call, Diana was already drafting the press release. "This is just the first step," she reminded me. "They won't give up easily. The Montgomerys have built their reputation on never losing." I touched my lip, the bruise now turning a mottled yellow-green. "Then it's time they learned how it feels. I've spent 15 years studying their tactics, Diana. Now I'm going to use everything they taught me to dismantle their empire piece by piece." "And what about Marcus?" she asked, looking up from her tablet. A cold smile crossed my face. "He's about to learn that the woman he married isn't the woman he tried to destroy." The next week was a masterclass in corporate warfare. While the Montgomerys launched their expected attacks through traditional channels, calling in favors from old money connections, attempting to pressure board members, and spreading carefully crafted rumors about my stability, I executed a strategy they never saw coming. My first move caught them completely off guard. Instead of trying to defend against their accusations, I went public with the entire story. Not through press releases or carefully worded statements, but through a digital exposé that detailed the attempted hostile takeover, complete with documentation of their failing empire and, most damagingly, police photographs of my injuries. From the night of the family gathering, "Are you sure about this?" Diana had asked when I proposed the strategy. "Once you release this, there's no going back. The Montgomerys will see it as a declaration of total war." I was standing by the window of my new office, a sleek, modern space in a building deliberately chosen for its distance from the Montgomerys' financial district territory. They declared war the moment Marcus raised his hand to me. "I'm just changing the battlefield." The story exploded across social media and tech news outlets. The timing was perfect, amid growing conversations about domestic violence and corporate accountability. The image of a successful female tech CEO being physically assaulted for refusing to surrender her company struck a powerful chord. The fact that it happened at a family gathering, in front of witnesses who did nothing to intervene, made it even more damning. Eleanor's carefully crafted narrative of family unity crumbled in the face of hard evidence. Her social media posts about praying for the family during this difficult time were met with scathing responses and calls for boycotts of Montgomery Holdings properties. The photos of my bruised face, juxtaposed with documentation of the family's attempted corporate takeover, painted a picture that no amount of PR spin could salvage. But I wasn't just fighting a public relations battle. While the Montgomerys scrambled to contain the PR damage, I was systematically dismantling their business empire. The financial records I'd discovered on our home network had revealed more than just their failing projects. They'd exposed a web of questionable dealings and potential regulatory violations. "Look at this," I told Diana, pointing to a series of transactions buried in their corporate filings. "They've been using shell companies to hide their losses and maintain their credit rating. Every major project they've undertaken in the last 3 years has been built on a foundation of financial manipulation." Diana's eyes narrowed as she studied the documents. This goes beyond just bad business practices. Some of these transactions could trigger serious regulatory investigations. Exactly, I replied, remembering all the times I'd sat through Montgomery family dinners, listening to Richard boast about his ability to manage regulatory oversight. They've always believed their connections would protect them. Time to test. In that theory. I assembled a team of forensic accountants and regulatory compliance experts, people who specialized in untangling complex financial schemes. Every discovery was carefully documented and anonymously submitted to relevant authorities. The Montgomerys had spent decades building a house of cards, believing their social status would protect them from scrutiny. They never imagined that someone who knew their methods intimately would systematically expose their foundation. Marcus attempted to retaliate by reaching out to TechVision's clients, trying to convince them that the company was unstable under my leadership. His efforts backfired spectacularly when several clients forwarded his communications to me, communications that contained proprietary information he shouldn't have had access to. We can add corporate espionage to the list, Diana noted, reviewing the emails. He's getting sloppy, desperate. She was right. The Marcus I'd known would never have made such an obvious mistake. But the Marcus I'd known had been a carefully constructed facade. The real man was the one who'd shown himself in his father's study, the one who resorted to violence when he couldn't get his way. The pressure began to show in other ways. Richard canceled his annual charity gala, a first in 30 years. Eleanor was notably absent from her usual social circuit. Thomas, who'd always lived in his brother's shadow, attempted to distance himself from the growing scandal by relocating to their London office. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Claire, Marcus's cousin who had always delighted in spreading family gossip, reached out through an intermediary. Apparently, she had been keeping records of her own, documentation, of questionable family business practices, recordings of conversations, even photographs from family events that showed a pattern of controlling behavior. "Why would she help us?" Diana asked suspiciously when I shared the information. "Because Claire has always understood something the rest of them never did. That real power lies in information, not intimidation." I remembered how she had always been present at family meetings, seemingly absorbed in her phone but actually observing everything. She's been waiting for someone to finally stand up to them. Claire's evidence provided the final pieces we needed. The complete picture it painted wasn't just of a failing business empire. It revealed a systematic pattern of financial manipulation, regulatory evasion, and corporate bullying that had sustained the Montgomery family's power for generations. As I reviewed the mounting evidence against them, I received an unexpected text from an unknown number. "You were right. We never saw it coming. E." Eleanor's message confirmed what I already knew. The Montgomerys were finally realizing the true extent of their vulnerability. They had spent so long believing in their own invincibility that they'd never considered someone might know all their secrets, understand all their tactics, and have the courage to use that knowledge against them. The facade of Montgomery family power was cracking, and through those cracks, the truth was beginning to shine through. But this was just the beginning. I had barely started to show them exactly what I was capable of. The impact of the Montgomery family's unraveling rippled through high society like a stone thrown into a still pond. Private clubs that had once welcomed them with open arms suddenly found their membership lists full. Charity boards quietly asked for Eleanor's resignation. Social events that had been Montgomery-centered for generations were abruptly being hosted by other families. I watched it all unfold from my new penthouse office, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city they'd once thought they owned. TechVision had not only survived their attempted takeover, but was thriving. Our stock price had rebounded and then soared as the market responded to our newest healthcare innovations and the story of corporate resilience. The securities and Exchange Commission has opened a formal investigation into Montgomery Holdings, Diana announced, striding into my office one morning. She dropped a thick folder on my desk. They're particularly interested in those shell companies we identified. I flipped through the documents, noting the extensive scope of the investigation. How did Richard take the news? Diana's smile was sharp. According to my sources, he had to be given a sedative. Apparently, he's not handling the loss of control well. The old Sarah might have felt a twinge of sympathy. The woman I'd become understood that this was simply consequence meeting action. The Montgomerys had built their empire on the assumption that rules were for other people. Now they were learning otherwise. My assistant buzzed through on the intercom. "Ms. Carter, Thomas Montgomery is in the lobby. He's requesting a meeting." Diana and I exchanged glances. Thomas had been the quiet one during the confrontation in Richard's study, more focused on the paperwork than the actual conflict. Of all the Montgomerys, he'd been the least involved in the attempted takeover. "Send him up," I decided, "but have security on standby." Thomas looked different from the last time I'd seen him. Thinner, more haunted. The perfectly tailored suits and carefully maintained appearance that were Montgomery trademarks had slipped. He stood awkwardly in my office, looking out of place among the modern decor that had replaced the traditional styling his family preferred. "Sarah," he began, then stopped, seeming unsure how to continue. I need your help." I gestured to a chair, but remained standing. "Help with what, Thomas? Has Marcus sent you to negotiate?" He shook his head quickly. "No, they don't know I'm here. I'm here because—" He swallowed hard. "Because you were right about everything. The company is collapsing. Father's health is failing. Marcus is becoming more unstable by the day. And I have evidence that could bring down what's left of the family." I studied him carefully. "Why would you want to do that to your own family?" "Because they're not just destroying themselves anymore." His voice cracked slightly. "Eleanor's started liquidating charitable trusts to cover losses. Pension funds for long-term employees are being drained. Hundreds of people who trusted our family are going to lose everything when this house of cards finally falls." It was exactly what I'd suspected, but hadn't been able to prove. The Montgomerys weren't just fighting to save their empire, they were burning everything and everyone around them in a desperate attempt to maintain their facade of power. "What kind of evidence?" Diana asked, her legal mind already at work. Thomas pulled out a USB drive. "Everything. Account numbers, transfer records, recordings of family meetings where they planned how to hide the losses. Even," he hesitated, looking at me, "even footage from the security cameras in Father's study the night of the family gathering." My hand unconsciously went to my lip, where the last traces of bruising had finally faded. "You kept that footage?" He nodded. I knew that night that everything was going to change, that what they were doing was wrong, but I was too much of a coward to stop it. I took the drive, turning it over in my hands. "Why now, Thomas? Why not come forward sooner?" "Because yesterday, I overheard Marcus and Father planning to drag your company down with them. They're going to try to trigger a market panic, spread rumors about security breaches in your healthcare systems. They don't care how many patients might be affected. They just want to prove they can still hurt you." The old Montgomery playbook. If you can't win, make sure everyone loses. But they'd forgotten who they were dealing with. I'd spent 15 years watching them operate, learning their tactics, understanding their weaknesses. "Diana," I turned to my lawyer, "how quickly can we move on this?" She was already on her phone. "I can have a team analyzing the evidence. Within the hour. If what Thomas says is true, we can have injunctions filed by morning." I turned back to Thomas. "You understand what this means? Once we use this evidence, there's no going back. The Montgomery name won't just be damaged, it will be destroyed." He stood straighter, and for the first time, I saw something in him that had never been there before: conviction. The name was destroyed the moment Marcus raised his hand to you. I'm just making sure the truth comes out before they can hurt anyone else." As Thomas left my office, I looked out over the city again. The Montgomery Empire had been built on secrets and fear, on the assumption that no one would dare to challenge them. They never understood that their greatest vulnerability wasn't their financial schemes or their social manipulations. It was their belief that loyalty could be bought and maintained through fear. I picked up my phone and dialed a familiar number. "Dr. Patel? Remember that healthcare initiative we discussed? The one to provide our systems to underserved communities? I think it's time we moved forward with that. And I know exactly which Montgomery properties we can repurpose for the clinics." The dismantling of their empire wouldn't just be about destruction, it would be about transformation. Everything they had built through intimidation and manipulation would be reformed into something actually beneficial to society. It was a kind of poetic justice that would have made Eleanor's perfectly maintained smile crack. The evidence Thomas provided proved more devastating than even I had anticipated. Within days of our legal team submitting the documentation to regulatory authorities, the full scope of Montgomery Holdings' deception began to emerge. The carefully constructed image of old money respectability crumbled as investigators uncovered layer after layer of financial manipulation. "The pension fund situation is worse than we thought," Diana reported during our morning briefing. She spread documents across my desk, each page revealing new depths of corruption. They didn't just borrow against the funds. They've been systematically replacing real assets with worthless paper for years. Thousands of employees' retirement savings are essentially gone. I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. Can we trace where the money went? That's the interesting part. Diana pulled up a complex diagram on her tablet. Most of it was funneled through a series of offshore accounts, but the final destination appears to be personal accounts belonging to Marcus and Richard. They weren't just trying to save the company. They were preparing their own golden parachutes. The revelation shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow it still did. Even after everything, some part of me hadn't wanted to believe they would steal from their own employees, people who had served the family loyally for decades. My phone buzzed with a news alert. Montgomery Holdings stock suspended amid fraud. Investigation. The headline was accompanied by a photo of Richard being escorted from their corporate headquarters by federal agents, his face ashen with rage and disbelief. Eleanor stood in the background, her perfectly maintained facade finally cracking as photographers captured her moment of devastation. "We need to move quickly," I told Diana, "before they can hide or destroy any more evidence. And we need to do something about those pension funds." She nodded, already typing on her phone. "I've got our finance team working on a proposal. If we structure it right, Tech Vision could potentially step in as a white knight, save the pensions, acquire key Montgomery assets at a discount, and come out looking like corporate heroes." The irony wasn't lost on me. The company they had tried to steal could end up owning the ruins of their empire, but unlike them, we would use those assets to actually help people. My assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Ms. Carter, Marcus is in the building. He somehow got past security. Should I call the police?" Before I could respond, my office door burst open. Marcus stood in the doorway, his appearance a shocking contrast to the polished executive I'd been married to. His expensive suit was rumpled, his face unshaven, and his eyes held a wild look I'd never seen before. "You vindictive bitch," he snarled, taking a step forward. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything." Diana reached for her phone, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Security's already on the way, aren't they, Lisa?" I asked my assistant calmly. "Yes, Ms. Carter, 30 seconds out." I turned, back to Marcus, noting how his hands trembled with barely suppressed rage. "I destroyed nothing, Marcus. You and your family did that all by yourselves. I just exposed the truth." He laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "The truth? You want to talk about truth? The truth is, You were nothing before us. We gave you everything. The connections, the opportunities, the status. And this is how you repay us? No, Marcus. I stood, walking around my desk to face him directly. The truth is that you never gave me anything. Everything I built despite you, not because of you. You just couldn't stand that, could you? The idea that your wife might be more successful than you? His face contorted, and for a moment I thought he might try to hit me again. But before he could move, security officers flooded the office. This time, there were witnesses. This time, there would be consequences. As they led him away, still shouting threats and accusations, I turned to Diana. Make sure that footage from my office security cameras is sent to the prosecutors, and draft a restraining order, not just against Marcus, but the entire family. She nodded, but her expression was concerned. They're going to get desperate now. This kind of public humiliation, the criminal charges, the loss of status, it's everything they feared most. Good, I replied, straightening papers on my desk that Marcus's entrance had disturbed. Let them feel what it's like to lose everything. Let them experience what they've put so many others through. My phone lit up with another message, this one from Claire. Eleanor's been hospitalized. Anxiety attack after the arrests. Richard's lawyer is trying to make a deal with prosecutors. The family's turning on each other. I remembered Eleanor's words from the night of the family gathering. The Montgomery family doesn't forgive betrayal. She had been right about that, but she'd never imagined they would end up betraying each other. Are you okay? Diana asked softly, watching me read the message. I looked out my window at the city skyline, where the Montgomery building had once dominated the view. Their logo was being removed today, another visible symbol of their falling empire. I'm better than okay, I replied. I'm free. And now, so are all the people they've been exploiting for years. Diana gathered her papers, preparing to leave. There's going to be fallout from this for months, maybe years. Criminal trials, civil suits, regulatory hearings. Let them come, I said firmly. Everything they did in darkness is going to be dragged into the light. It's time for the world to see the real Montgomery family. As if to punctuate my words, another news alert flashed across my screen. Montgomery Family Trust frozen. Charitable foundations under investigation. The empire wasn't just crumbling anymore. It was being systematically dismantled, brick by corrupt brick. The media dubbed it the Montgomery Meltdown. What had started as a family power struggle had evolved into one of the biggest financial scandals of the year. Every day brought new revelations, each more damaging than the last. But while the public was fascinated by the salacious details of the family's downfall, I was focused on something more important: rebuilding what they had destroyed. The pension fund restoration project is ready to launch, I announced to our board of directors. The boardroom, now relocated to our new headquarters, was a stark contrast to the old-world opulence of Montgomery Holdings. Modern, transparent, and filled with natural light, it reflected the company culture I'd always envisioned. The financial impact on TechVision will be significant, one director cautioned. Taking on those pension obligations will be offset by the acquisition of Montgomery assets at pennies on the dollar, I finished. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do. Those employees didn't deserve to lose their retirement savings because of the family's greed. The vote was unanimous. Within hours, we announced a comprehensive plan to protect the pensions of former Montgomery Holdings employees. The press coverage was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Tech, CO saves thousands of pensions after ex-husband's family's fraud. Diana arrived at my office later that day with more updates. Richard's plea deal just became public. He's turning state's evidence against Marcus and several board members. Apparently, family loyalty only goes so far when you're facing federal charges. I wasn't surprised. The Montgomerys had always preached family unity, but their true loyalty had only ever been to power and status. Now that both were gone, they were turning on each other with the same ruthlessness they'd once directed at outsiders. "There's something else," Diana continued, her expression serious. "Eleanor's requesting a private meeting. She sent this through. Her personal attorney, not the family's legal team." That was unexpected. Eleanor Montgomery had always been the family's chief architect of social manipulation. For her to reach out independently, especially now, meant something significant had changed. Set it up, I decided. But not here, somewhere neutral. The meeting was arranged for the following day at a small, private restaurant, the kind of place the old Eleanor would never have deigned to visit. When I arrived, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes and perfect makeup. Instead, she wore simple black slacks and a sweater, her face bare of cosmetics and showing every one of her 60-plus years. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly as I sat down. "No air kisses, no social pretense. I know you have every reason to refuse." "Why am I here, Eleanor?" She took a deep breath. "Because you need to know the truth, about everything, about why we really targeted your company, and what Marcus was planning to do even before that night at the family gathering." For the next hour, Eleanor laid bare the full extent of the Montgomery family's desperation and deception. The real estate empire had been failing for years, propped up by increasingly risky financial maneuvers. Marcus's marriage to me had been strategic from the start. They'd identified me early on as someone with potential, someone they could mold and eventually exploit. "We thought we were so clever," Eleanor admitted, her voice bitter. "Looking for someone brilliant but isolated, someone who would be grateful for the family's acceptance. We never imagined you'd outgrow our control." "Why tell me this now?" I asked, studying her face for any sign of manipulation. "Because I'm dying," she replied simply. "Cancer, very advanced. The doctors give me 6 months at most, and I don't want to die knowing I helped destroy innocent people's lives to protect a lie." She reached into her bag and pulled out a USB drive. "This contains everything. Family. Records going back 3 generations. Every scheme, every manipulation, every person we've ever destroyed to maintain our position. Use it however you want." I took the drive, feeling its weight in my hand. "This won't change anything, Eleanor. It won't save Richard or Marcus from prosecution." "I don't expect it to," she said, standing up. "But maybe it can help you protect others from families like ours. There are more Montgomerys out there. Sarah. Different names, same tactics." As she turned to leave, she paused. "That night when Marcus hit you, I should have stopped him. I should have done a lot of things differently. I know it means nothing now, but I'm sorry." I watched her walk away, her once proud posture now stooped with the weight of her revelations. The Eleanor Montgomery who had terrified society debutantes and ruled charity boards with an iron fist was gone, replaced by a woman finally facing the consequences of a lifetime of choices. Back at my office, I reviewed the contents of Eleanor's drive. The scope of the Montgomery family's manipulation was even broader than I'd imagined. Their influence had extended into politics, judiciary, even medical research funding. They hadn't just been wealthy, they'd been architects of a system designed to perpetuate power at any cost. "What are you going to do with all this?" Diana asked after I'd shown her some of the key documents. I looked out at the city skyline, where the space once dominated by the Montgomery building now showed a gap like a missing tooth. "We're going to use it to make sure this never happens again. Tech Vision isn't just going to be about healthcare innovation anymore. We're going to create a foundation dedicated to corporate accountability and protecting whistleblowers." "They're not going to like that," Diana warned. "Not just the Montgomerys, but all the other families like them. I smiled, thinking of Eleanor's warning about other families using the same tactics. Good. It's time they learned that the old ways of doing business are over. The world is changing, and they can either change with it or end up like the Montgomerys. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across my office. Somewhere in a federal holding facility, Marcus was awaiting trial. Richard was negotiating his plea deal, and Eleanor was facing her own final reckoning. The Montgomery family had tried to break me, but instead, they'd given me the tools and motivation to break a system that had protected people like them for generations. The day of Marcus's sentencing arrived with an unexpected autumn chill. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and photographers, all eager to capture the final chapter of the Montgomery saga. I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching as the man who had once been my husband was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from his beloved Tom Ford suits. The evidence against him had been overwhelming. Between Thomas's documentation, Eleanor's revelations, and the mountain of financial records our team had uncovered, Marcus's defense had crumbled before it even began. His own father's testimony against him had been the final nail in the coffin. "The defendant will rise," the judge announced, her voice cutting through the hushed courtroom. Marcus stood, but his shoulders were slumped, his once proud posture broken. He didn't look back at the gallery, didn't try to find me in the crowd. He knew I was there. I'd made sure of that. "Marcus Montgomery," the judge began, "you have been found guilty of multiple counts of securities fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, and corporate theft. The evidence presented shows not just criminal activity, but a profound breach of trust of your employees, your shareholders, and the public." I watched as the judge detailed his crimes, each one a reminder of how the mighty Montgomery empire had been built on lies and manipulation. When she finally announced the sentence, 15 years in federal prison, I felt no joy, no satisfaction. Instead, I felt a profound sense of closure. As the bailiffs led him away, Marcus finally turned, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment. In that look, I saw something I'd never seen before. Recognition. Not of me as his wife or as his victim, but as the architect of his downfall. He finally understood that I hadn't just survived his betrayal, I had transformed it into the weapon that destroyed everything he held dear. Outside the courthouse, Diana met me at the bottom of the steps. "Richard's sentencing is next week," she reminded me. "And the civil suits against the family are just beginning. This could drag on for years." "Let it," I replied, watching the media frenzy around Marcus's transport vehicle. "Every day this stays in the news is another day. Other families like the Montgomerys are put on notice." Back at TechVision's headquarters, I found my team gathered in the conference room. On the screens, news coverage of the sentencing played on mute while they reviewed the latest projections for our healthcare initiatives. "The Montgomery Foundation assets have been fully transferred," our CFO reported. "We've already begun converting their old properties into medical centers. The first clinic opens next month in what used to be their flagship hotel." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The very buildings that had once symbolized Montgomery excess and privilege were being transformed into centers of healing and hope. It was a metamorphosis that went beyond mere business. It was a statement about the kind of power that truly mattered. "Ms. Carter," my assistant appeared at the door. "Claire Montgomery is here to see you." Claire entered the conference room, looking both out of place and oddly at home. Of all the Montgomery family members, she had emerged from the scandal relatively unscathed, largely thanks to her early cooperation with investigators. "I thought you should have this," she said, placing a familiar-looking invitation on the table. "They found it in Eleanor's personal effects after she passed. She never sent it out, but, well, you should read it." The invitation was to what would have been the Montgomery family's annual harvest gathering, the same event where everything had started. But Eleanor had changed the wording. Instead of the usual formal announcement, she had written a simple message I was wrong. You won. The family deserves everything that's coming. She wrote this the day before she died, Claire explained. I think she finally understood what the family name had really come to mean. I picked up the invitation, feeling the weight of the heavy cardstock. And what about you, Claire? What do you think it means now? She smiled, a genuine expression that held none of the old Montgomery social artifice. I think it means whatever you want it to mean. You're the one who broke the cycle, Sarah. You showed that real power isn't about what you can take from others. It's about what you can build for yourself. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city that had once been the Montgomerys' playground. The landscape had changed, not just physically, with their name removed from buildings and properties, but fundamentally. Their fall had created space for new growth, new possibilities. My phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Patel. First patients scheduled for the new clinic next week. Their lives will be better because of what you built from the ashes of their empire. That night, as I left the office, I passed the wall where we displayed our company's mission statement. Below it, I'd recently added a new quote. True power lies not in what you can take from others, but in what you can create for the world. The security guard nodded as I passed, and I remembered that night at the Montgomery estate, when a similar guard had hesitated to let me leave. Everything had changed since then. I had changed. The woman who had driven away from that family, gathering in tears, was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and more powerful than the Montgomerys had ever imagined. Their attempt to break me had instead broken their hold over everything they thought they owned, and in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. 1 year after Marcus's sentencing, I stood on a stage at the Global Innovation Summit, preparing to deliver the keynote address. The audience was filled with tech leaders, healthcare professionals, and, most notably, representatives from old money families who had once moved in the Montgomery's circle. They weren't here by choice. They were here because they couldn't afford not to be. Tech vision had evolved into something far beyond what either Marcus or I had originally envisioned. Our healthcare technology was revolutionizing patient care across the globe, but it was our corporate accountability initiative that had truly shaken the foundations of the business world. The old model of power is dead, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. For generations, we've accepted the idea that success means taking from others, that power means control through fear and manipulation. The Montgomery scandal showed us the cost of that thinking, not just in dollars, but in human lives and broken trust. From my position on stage, I could see some of the old guard shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They knew what was coming. In the past year, our Corporate Accountability Foundation had exposed 3 more family-run corporations engaging in similar practices to the Montgomerys. Each exposure had been followed by reform, either voluntary or forced. But today, I'm not here to talk about the past. I'm here to announce the future. I gestured to the screen behind me, where our new initiative appeared. TechVision is launching the Corporate Renaissance Program, a billion-dollar commitment to helping traditional companies transition to modern, ethical business practices. The irony was delicious. The very families who had once looked down on me, who had supported the Montgomerys' attempt to steal my company, were now being offered a lifeline by that same company. But it was a lifeline that came with strings, complete transparency, ethical governance, and a commitment to social responsibility. Diana sat in the front row, a slight smile playing on her lips. She knew, as I did, that we weren't just offering help. We were offering the old guard a choice: evolve or face the same fate as the Montgomerys. After the presentation, I met with Thomas in the conference center's garden. He had fully separated himself from his family's legacy, starting a small consulting firm that helped companies identify and correct ethical breaches before they became scandals. "You've changed everything," he said, looking out over the carefully manicured lawns. Not just the business landscape, you've changed how people think about power itself. The world was ready for change, I replied. The Montgomerys just didn't see it coming. A group of young entrepreneurs approached, eager to discuss the corporate renaissance program. Among them was a woman whose confident bearing reminded me of myself at that age, before the Montgomerys, before the betrayal, when all I had was a dream and the determination to make it reality. "Ms. Carter," she began, "your story inspired me to leave my family's company and start my own tech firm, but they're threatening to cut me off completely." I held up a hand, stopping her. "Let me guess. They think they can control you. Through money and social connections?" She nodded, her expression a mixture of frustration and determination. 10 years ago, I would have told you to be careful, to play their game," I said, remembering my own journey. "But now? Now I'll tell you this. Build something so extraordinary that they'll have no choice but to watch from the sidelines as you and succeed." Later that evening, I received a message from Claire. She had attached a photo taken at the last Montgomery family gathering. The night everything had changed. In it, I stood next to Marcus, smiling for the camera while his hand gripped my arm possessively. The old Sarah's eyes held a hint of uncertainty, of fear. "Found this while clearing out the estate," Claire's message read. "Thought you might want to see how far you've come." I studied the photo, remembering the woman I had been. Talented but contained, ambitious but constrained by the Montgomery family's expectations and demands. That woman could never have imagined standing on a global stage, not just succeeding but fundamentally changing the way business was done. My phone buzzed again, this time with news that our latest healthcare innovation had received FDA approval. The system would make life-saving treatments accessible to millions who couldn't previously afford them. We were using the very buildings that had once symbolized Montgomery access to house medical clinics and research facilities. "The board meeting is starting," my assistant reminded me. "They're waiting to discuss the expansion of the accountability initiative." I took one last look at the photo before deleting it. The past was valuable as a lesson, but it wasn't where I lived anymore. The future, my future, was about creating something new, something better. In the boardroom, faces both familiar and new greeted me. Our board now included some of the brightest minds in technology, healthcare, and ethical business practices. The old portraits of Montgomery patriarchs had been replaced by artwork created by patients in our medical centers. "Let's begin," I said, taking my seat at the head of the table. "We have a world to change." 3 years to the day after that fateful family gathering, I stood in my office reviewing the final paperwork for the acquisition of Montgomery Holdings' last remaining asset, their historic family estate. The irony wasn't lost on me that the very house where Marcus had tried to steal my company would now become the headquarters for our Corporate Ethics Institute. Diana entered with a stack of newspapers, each headline telling a different part of the same story. Tech Vision CEO revolutionizes corporate culture. Former Montgomery estate to become ethics training center. Sarah Carter named business leader of the decade. "You might want to see this one," she said, placing a specific article on top. It was from a small local paper in the town where Marcus was serving his sentence. The headline read, "Former business mogul requests early release, citing reformed character." "He's trying to reinvent himself," Diana observed. "Claims he's had a complete change of heart about corporate responsibility. Even wrote a letter to the judge about how his fall from grace taught him humility." I smiled, remembering Eleanor's final words about the family's ability to adapt and survive. "Let me guess, he's hoping to position himself as a reformed corporate villain, ready to join the ethics movement." "That's his play," Diana confirmed. "But there's something else. He's requested a meeting with you before his hearing. Says he has something important to tell you." The old Sarah might have felt a flutter of uncertainty at such a request. The woman I'd become simply felt curiosity. "Set it up," But not at the prison. I want this on my terms. A week later, I sat in the visiting room of the minimum security facility where Marcus was serving his sentence. The room was designed to feel less institutional, with comfortable chairs and natural light, but nothing could hide its true nature. Marcus entered wearing standard prison attire, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to his once impeccable wardrobe. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying an unfamiliar note of humility. "Thank you for coming." "You wanted to talk, Marcus, so talk." He sat down carefully, as if weighing each movement. "I've had a lot of time to think in here. About what I did, about who I was, who I became because of my family's expectations. And what great insights have you gained?" I kept my voice neutral, watching him closely. "That you were right, about everything. The way we did business, the way we treated people. It was all wrong. I see that now." He leaned forward, earnestness radiating from every pore. "I want to make amends, to be part of the solution." I studied him for a moment, noting the subtle tells that hadn't changed. The slight tightening around his eyes when he was performing, the way his hands remained perfectly still when he was trying to convince someone of something. "You know what your biggest mistake was, Marcus?" I asked, interrupting his carefully prepared speech. "It wasn't the fraud or the attempted theft of my company, or even hitting me. It was believing that power only flows in one direction, from those who take to those who give." He blinked, thrown off script. "I don't understand." The real power was never in the Montgomery name, or the family connections, or the social status. It was in what we could create, what we could build. You could have been part of something revolutionary, something that actually helped people. Instead, you chose to try to steal what you couldn't build yourself. "That's why I'm reaching out now," he insisted. "I want to be part of building something better." I stood, smoothing down my jacket. "No, Marcus. You want to find a new angle? A new way to regain some measure of control. But here's what you still don't understand. I didn't succeed because I outmaneuvered you. I succeeded because I was building something genuine while you were just maintaining a facade." As I turned to leave, he called out, "The family estate. I heard you bought it. What are you going to do with it?" I paused at the door. "We're turning it into a place where the next generation of business leaders will learn the difference between real power and the illusion of it. Your father's study, where you tried to force me to sign away my company? That's going to be a classroom where we teach ethics and corporate responsibility." The look on his face, a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension, stayed with me as I left the prison. Back in my car, Diana was waiting with updates on our latest initiatives. "The first class of ethics fellows starts next month," she reported. "We had over 1,000 applications for 20 spots. And the healthcare division just finalized the patent for the new patient care system." I looked out the window as we drove past the former Montgomery Holdings building, now home to a consortium of healthcare startups we were mentoring. The Montgomery name had been replaced by a simple phrase, "Build something better." "You know," Diana mused, "when this all started, most people thought you were just seeking revenge. They didn't understand what you were really building." "Most people still think power is about what you can take from others," I replied. "They don't realize that real power is about what you can create, what you can change." As we pulled up to TechVision's headquarters, I saw a group of young entrepreneurs waiting in the lobby. They were part of our mentorship program, each one working on innovations that could genuinely improve people's lives. "That's the real victory," I told Diana, watching them excitedly discuss their projects. "Not destroying the old way of doing business, but creating a new one. The Montgomerys tried to break me because they thought power was about control. Instead, they freed me to show the world what real power looks like." And that, in the end, was the greatest transformation of all. The transformation of the Montgomery estate was nearly complete. As I walked through the marble halls that had once echoed with the sound of society gatherings, I marveled at how different everything felt. The pretentious oil paintings had been replaced with inspiring murals created by local artists. The grand ballroom where I'd been humiliated was now a state-of-the-art conference center for ethical business seminars. The first international delegation arrives tomorrow, Diana reminded me as we toured the renovated space. CEOs and executives from 12 countries, all here to learn about corporate transformation. But our tour was interrupted by an urgent call. Claire's voice came through, tense and worried. "Sarah, you need to turn on the news, now." The headline streaming across every major network stopped me in my tracks. Former Montgomery associates launch rival healthcare initiative. The story revealed that a group of Marcus's old business partners had banded together, using their combined resources to create a competing healthcare technology company. They were positioning themselves as the traditional alternative to TechVision's progressive approach. "They're trying to rally the old guard," Diana observed, already scrolling through reports on her tablet. "Playing on fears about how much the business world has changed. They're promising to restore stability to the healthcare sector." I should have seen this coming. The Montgomery fall had created a power vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. The old business elite was trying to reclaim their relevance, using our own industry as their battleground. "Get me everything you can on their investors," I instructed Diana, "and set up a meeting with Dr. Patel. If they're entering the healthcare space, we need to understand their real motivations." The next morning, as international business leaders filled the former Montgomery estate, I received another surprising visit. Thomas arrived, looking troubled. "They approached me," he admitted. "The new healthcare initiative. They want me to join them, to give them legitimacy. They're offering a complete reputation rehabilitation." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them I needed time to think." He met my gaze steadily. "But I came here first. You need to know what they're planning. This isn't just about business. They want to discredit everything you've built. They're going to try to paint your success as a personal vendetta against the Montgomerys, not a legitimate business revolution." A familiar voice interrupted. "So they won't succeed?" Dr. Patel stood in the doorway, her expression fierce. "Because we won't let them." Over the next hour, Dr. Patel revealed that the rival healthcare initiative had already approached several of her colleagues, offering partnerships that seemed generous on the surface, but contained hidden control mechanisms, the same tactics the Montgomerys had once used. "But here's what they don't understand," Dr. Patel continued. "The medical community remembers who was there when we needed real innovation, not just profit. We remember who actually put patients first." I walked to the window, looking out at the estate's grounds where international business leaders were now gathering. Each of them represented a company at a crossroads, facing the choice between clinging to old power structures and embracing genuine transformation. "Call an emergency board meeting," I told Diana. "But not here. At the old Montgomery building downtown." "The one we converted into the startup incubator?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Exactly. It's time to show everyone that this isn't about old versus new. It's about who's actually building the future." The next day, as board members filed into what had once been Richard Montgomery's personal boardroom, now a vibrant collaborative space filled with young innovators, I laid out our response to the challenge. "They think they can beat us by returning to the old ways," I began. "But they're fighting a battle that's already been lost. While they're trying to rebuild walls, we've been breaking down barriers. While they're trying to concentrate power, we've been distributing it." I revealed our new initiative, an open-source healthcare technology platform that would allow developers worldwide to contribute to improving patient care. It was the opposite of the old Montgomery approach of hoarding knowledge and controlling access. "They want to make this personal?" I continued. "Fine, let's show them what personal really means. Every patient who's received better care because of our innovations, every startup we've helped launch, Every life we've improved, that's personal. That's real power. The international delegates watched from the gallery as our board unanimously approved the initiative. Among them, I noticed several faces I recognized from old Montgomery gatherings. People who had once dismissed me, now taking notes on how to transform their own companies. As the meeting concluded, Thomas approached me again. "I know what to tell them now," he said. "The answer is no. Some legacies aren't worth reviving." Looking around at what we'd built, the incubator full of passionate innovators, the international leaders eager to learn a new way of doing business, the healthcare professionals committed to real change, I realized that this latest challenge wasn't a threat. It was an opportunity to prove yet again that true power comes from creation, not control. "Let them try to rebuild the old walls," I told Diana as we left the meeting. "We'll just keep showing the world what happens when you tear them down instead." The launch of our open-source healthcare platform sent shockwaves through the industry. While our competitors scrambled to protect their proprietary systems, we were inviting collaboration from developers and healthcare providers worldwide. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Their walls versus our bridges, their control versus our community. But the rival healthcare initiative, now calling itself Heritage Health Solutions, wasn't backing down. Looking out over the city, I could see the lights of hospitals where our systems were helping doctors save lives right at that moment. In developing countries, our technology was enabling remote diagnoses and treatment. In crisis zones, our emergency response protocols were helping coordinate relief efforts. "They still think this is about the Montgomerys," I told Thomas. "About revenge or power or control. They don't understand that we're not fighting against something anymore. We're building towards something, and that's a battle they can't win." Operation Legacy turned out to be more insidious than we'd anticipated. Heritage Health Solutions had spent months quietly assembling a coalition of old money families and traditional healthcare executives, all united by their fear of the changes we'd sparked in the industry. Their plan wasn't just to compete with us, it was to fundamentally challenge the new paradigm we'd created. "They're calling for increased regulation of healthcare technology," Diana reported, spreading documents across my desk. "Specifically, targeting open-source medical systems and collaborative development platforms. They're claiming it's about safety and security, but it's really about control," I finished, scanning the proposals. The legislation they were pushing would effectively force healthcare technology back into the old model: proprietary, expensive, and accessible only to those who could afford premium prices. I was reviewing their proposal when my phone lit up with an urgent message from Dr. Patel. "Turn on the news, now." Heritage's CEO was holding a press conference, standing in front of their newly opened headquarters, a gleaming tower that deliberately mimicked the architectural style of the old Montgomery buildings. But it was his words that caught my attention. "While some companies prioritize rapid change and untested innovations," he was saying, his tone carefully measured, "we believe in the proven traditions of healthcare excellence. Our focus is on maintaining the high standards that have always characterized premium medical care." The message was clear. They were positioning themselves as the guardians of quality healthcare, implying that our open-source approach somehow meant lower standards. It was a clever play, designed to prey on people's fears about medical technology. But they had made one crucial mistake. "Diana," I called, already reaching for my phone, "get me Dr. Zhang from the WHO and contact every major hospital using our systems. It's time to show the world what high standards really look like." Over the next 24 hours, we assembled an unprecedented coalition. Doctors from rural clinics in developing countries, surgeons from leading hospitals, emergency responders, who had used our systems in crisis zones. Each had a story to tell about how open-source healthcare technology had transformed their ability to save lives. We didn't hold a press conference. Instead, we launched a global live stream, showing real-time examples of our technology in action. In Brazil, a remote village doctor was using our platform to consult with specialists in São Paulo. In Kenya, a mobile clinic was delivering specialized care using our diagnostic tools. In New York, a team of surgeons was performing a groundbreaking operation guided by our surgical assistance system. "This is what excellence looks like," I told the cameras when I finally appeared on the stream. "Not in boardrooms or legislative proposals, but in lives saved and communities served." But Heritage wasn't finished. They launched a series of attack ads, featuring paid testimonials from former Montgomery associates claiming that our success was built on stolen ideas and technology. It was a desperate move, but one that required a response. I chose to deliver that response from an unexpected location, the prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. "You want to talk about stolen ideas?" I addressed the cameras, standing in the same visiting room where Marcus had tried to convince me of his reformation. "Let me tell you about real theft. Real theft is when you try to take someone's life's work through intimidation and violence. Real theft is when you attempt to maintain power by denying others the chance to innovate and grow." The cameras followed me as I walked through the prison corridors. This is where attempts to control and restrict innovation lead. But out there? I gestured beyond the prison walls. Out there, we're building something different. Something that can't be stolen or controlled because it belongs to everyone who wants to make healthcare better. The impact was immediate. Heritage's stock price plummeted as investors recognized the futility of fighting against the future. Their legislative proposals were met with a flood of opposition from medical professionals worldwide. Even their premium hospital partners began to waver as patients demanded access to the more advanced open-source systems. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Young members of the very families that had backed Heritage began to break ranks. They saw the writing on the wall. The old way of doing business was dying, and they wanted to be part of what came next. "Ms. Carter," my assistant interrupted my thoughts. "The first group of Heritage developers has arrived. They're requesting to join our open-source community." I smiled, remembering how the Montgomerys had always feared losing control. They never understood that true power comes from letting go, from creating something bigger than yourself and allowing it to grow. "Beyond your control. Show them to the collaboration space," I instructed, "and make sure they understand, here, we don't just write code, we write the future." Looking out from my office at the city skyline, I could see the Heritage Tower standing like a monument to the old way of thinking. But all around it, hospitals were using our systems to save lives. Clinics were expanding their capabilities through our platform. Developers worldwide were contributing to a healthcare revolution that couldn't be stopped by any amount of money or influence. The Montgomerys had tried to break me by taking away what they thought was my source of power. Instead, they had forced me to discover a different kind of power altogether, the power of creating something that could change the world. 5 years had passed since that rainy night when Marcus had slapped me at the family gathering. The world of corporate power had shifted so dramatically that it was almost unrecognizable. The Heritage Tower, once a symbol of resistance to change, now housed a collaborative innovation center where traditional healthcare companies worked alongside tech startups to create new solutions. I was reviewing plans for our newest global initiative when Diana burst into my office, her typically composed demeanor shaken. "You need to see this," she said, handing me her tablet. "Marcus is being released early. Good behavior and cooperation with ongoing investigations." The news shouldn't have affected me. I'd moved so far beyond the Montgomerys that they felt like characters from someone else's story. Yet something about this development stirred my curiosity. "There's more," Diana continued. "He's written a book. The Fall of Empire, a Montgomery story. It's being published next month." I scrolled through the pre-release details. Marcus was positioning himself as a reformed man, claiming to have seen the error of the old ways during his time in prison. He was promising to reveal the true story of how the Montgomery Empire fell and how it led to a revolution in corporate America. "Should we try to stop the publication?" Diana asked, already thinking like a lawyer. "No," I replied, setting down the tablet. "Let him tell his story. We'll let our work speak for itself." That evening, as I walked through what had once been the Montgomery estate, now bustling with young entrepreneurs and healthcare innovators, I received an unexpected message from Claire. "He wants to do the book launch here, at the estate. Says it would be poetic justice to tell his story of transformation in the place where it all began." The request was audacious, exactly the kind of dramatic gesture the old Marcus would have orchestrated. But something about it felt different. This time. "Set it up," I told Claire. "But on our terms." The launch event was scheduled for exactly 5 years to the day after the family gathering that had changed everything. As the date approached, our team transformed the estate's grand hall, where I had once been humiliated, into a showcase of everything we'd achieved since then. The walls displayed real-time data from hospitals worldwide using our systems. Screens showed testimonials from patients whose lives had been saved by our technology. One entire section was dedicated to the young innovators we'd supported, their success stories a testament to what could be achieved when power was used to elevate others rather than control them. On the morning of the event, I arrived early, walking through the empty halls that had once intimidated me with their opulence. Now they were filled with light and purpose, every space redesigned to foster collaboration and innovation. Marcus arrived exactly on schedule, looking both familiar and strange. Prison had aged him, but there was something else different about him, a humility that hadn't been there before. "Sarah," he said quietly, as we met in what had once been Richard's study, now a bright conference room where healthcare breakthroughs were regularly discussed. "Thank you for allowing this." "I'm curious, Marcus," I replied, studying him. "Why here? Why not choose a neutral location?" He looked around the room, taking in the changes. "Because this is where I lost everything, and where you found something greater than what we thought was important." The event began with Marcus reading from his book. His words were surprising, not just an admission of wrongdoing, but a deeper recognition of the fundamental flaws in the way he and his family had viewed power. "We thought power meant control," he read to the assembled crowd. "We thought success meant taking what others had built. But in trying to destroy one woman's company, we inadvertently sparked a revolution that showed us what real power looks like." As he spoke, I watched the faces in the audience, young entrepreneurs, healthcare professionals, even some former Montgomery associates who had chosen to adapt to the new way of doing business. They weren't just listening to a story of personal transformation. They were witnessing the final chapter of an old way of thinking. After the reading, Marcus approached me one last time. "I know this doesn't change anything," he said, gesturing to his book. "But I wanted people to understand. You didn't just beat us, you showed us a better way." "It was never about beating anyone, Marcus," I replied. "It was about building something that mattered." Later that night, after the crowds had gone, I stood in my office overlooking the city. The lights of hospitals using our systems twinkled, like stars, each one representing lives being saved and improved. The Heritage Tower, now our largest innovation center, stood as a reminder that change was possible, even in the most entrenched systems. Diana found me there, holding a copy of Marcus's book. "Well, that's it then," she said. "The final chapter of the Montgomery story." "No," I corrected her, turning away from the window. "It's just one chapter in a much bigger story, one that's still being written by every person who chooses to use their power to create rather than control." On my desk lay the plans for our next initiative, a global network of healthcare innovation centers, each one designed to empower local communities to develop their own solutions. The Montgomery name might have faded into history, but the revolution they had inadvertently sparked was still transforming the world. And that was a power that no one could ever take away. The Global Healthcare Summit in Singapore marked a new chapter in our journey. As I prepared to deliver the keynote address, news broke that shook the corporate world. Several major traditional healthcare conglomerates were merging to form what they called the Global Health Alliance. This wasn't just another business consolidation. It was an attempt to recreate the old power structure on an international scale. They're calling it healthcare standardization, Diana reported, showing me the announcement on her tablet. But look at the names involved. The list read like a who's who of old money families from across the globe: European pharmaceutical dynasties, Asian hospital chains, American insurance moguls. Many had been Montgomery allies in the past. It's not just about healthcare anymore, Thomas added, joining us in the preparation room. They're trying to prove that the old way of doing business can still work, just on a bigger stage. I studied the faces of the alliance leaders gathered for their own press conference across town. Their message was carefully crafted. Talks about quality control, proven methodologies, and traditional excellence. But beneath the polished words lay the same fear that had driven the Montgomerys: fear of losing control, fear of change, fear of a world where power couldn't be hoarded. Ms. Carter, my assistant interrupted, Dr. Zhang and the WHO team are ready for the private briefing before your keynote. The meeting room overlooked Singapore's ultra-modern skyline, a fitting backdrop for discussions about the future of healthcare. Dr. Zhang didn't waste time with pleasantries. The alliance isn't just targeting your business model, she warned. They're lobbying for international regulations that would effectively lock out open-source medical technology in developing regions. They're claiming it's about safety, but it's about maintaining their monopoly on healthcare access. I finished. They want to force developing nations to depend on their proprietary systems. The implications were staggering. While we had been focusing on innovation and accessibility, they had been building a framework to control global healthcare delivery. It was the Montgomery playbook scaled up to international proportions. But they had made the same fundamental mistake, assuming that power came from control rather than creation. Show me the latest data from our global initiative, I requested. The screens came alive with real-time information from our healthcare networks worldwide. Remote clinics in rural India conducting telemedicine consultations with specialists. Mobile medical units in Africa using our diagnostic tools. Emergency response teams in South America coordinating disaster relief. This is what they're really afraid of, I told the assembled team. Not just the technology, but the proof that healthcare innovation doesn't need to be controlled by a privileged few. The keynote speech would be crucial. The world's medical community was watching, and the alliance had already begun their campaign of fear and doubt. But I had learned long ago that the best response to fear was hope, backed by undeniable results. As I took the stage, the massive screens behind me displayed not corporate logos or marketing slogans, but live feeds from hospitals and clinics using our open-source systems. Each feed told a story of lives saved, communities served, and barriers broken. They tell us that healthcare innovation must be controlled to be safe, I began, my voice carrying across the packed auditorium. That only traditional power structures can ensure quality. That the old ways are the best ways. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. But I'm here to show you something different. With a gesture, I brought up new data, comparative studies showing how open-source healthcare technology had improved patient outcomes across every metric, cost reductions, increased access, faster innovation cycles. But most importantly, lives saved in places the traditional system had never reached. The choice before us isn't between old and new, traditional and modern, I continued. It's between a healthcare system that serves the few and one that serves everyone. Between innovation that's controlled and innovation that's shared. As I spoke, news alerts began flooding phones throughout the audience. The Alliance's carefully orchestrated launch was being overshadowed by announcements from their own member organizations. Young leaders within the old money families were breaking ranks, pledging to join our open source initiative. Diana's tablet lit up with message after message. Developers, doctors, and healthcare administrators worldwide declaring their support for accessible medical technology. The Alliance's attempt to resurrect the old power structure was crumbling before it could even fully form. After the keynote, I received an unexpected message from Marcus, still working to make amends for his past. They tried to recruit me for the Alliance, offered to restore the Montgomery name. I told them they were fighting yesterday's battle. Looking out over Singapore's glittering skyline that evening, I reflected on how far we'd come from that rainy night at the Montgomery estate. The slap that was meant to remind me of my place had instead launched a revolution that was still transforming the world. The Alliance is already falling apart, Diana reported, joining me at the window. Their biggest investors are pulling out. No one wants to be on the wrong side of history. It's not about sides, I corrected her. It's about understanding that real power doesn't need to be defended. It grows by being shared. The fallout from the Singapore summit reverberated through the global healthcare industry like an earthquake. Within weeks, 3 major European pharmaceutical companies that had been part of the Alliance announced their transition to open-source drug development platforms. Asian hospital networks began integrating our collaborative care systems. The transformation we'd started in one family's study was now reshaping healthcare delivery worldwide. But success had taught me to be wary of quiet periods. Diana shared, my concern when an unusual pattern emerged in our global data analytics. Someone's probing our systems, she reported one morning, spreading security logs across my desk. Not trying to break in exactly, but testing responses, mapping infrastructure. It's sophisticated, and it's coming from multiple points around the world. The investigation revealed something unexpected. The attempts weren't coming from our obvious adversaries in the Alliance, but from a network of smaller tech companies, all recently acquired by a holding company based in Dubai. The company's name caught my attention, Phoenix Global Innovations. Look who's on their board, Thomas said, pulling up their corporate filing. The list included several names we recognized, not major players from the old guard, but their children. The next generation of privilege had decided to make their own play for power. They're not trying to fight the future anymore, I realized, studying their strategy. They're trying to co-opt it. Take our model, but keep control in the hands of a select few. This was a more subtle threat than anything the Montgomerys or the Alliance had attempted. These weren't old money families trying to maintain their position. These were their heirs, attempting to reshape the new paradigm to serve their interests. I received an invitation to meet with Phoenix's CEO, Catherine Rothschild Chen, the daughter of 2 prominent banking families. The suggested location was telling, her private island off the coast of Thailand. This wasn't just a business meeting, it was a display of new money's power. It's probably a trap, Diana warned. They'll try to paint you as an elitist, meeting in such an exclusive location. Use it to undermine your message about accessibility. Then let's change the game, I replied. Tell her I'll meet her at our newest clinic in rural Thailand. Let's see how she handles real healthcare on the ground. The clinic had been transformed from a rundown local hospital into a state-of-the-art medical facility, all through our open-source technology and community-driven development. When Catherine arrived, dressed in designer resort wear that looked absurdly out of place, she found me in the midst of a telemedicine consultation connecting local doctors with specialists in Bangkok. Impressive setup, she admitted, watching, as our systems coordinated patient care in real time. This is actually why I wanted to meet. We see the value in what you've built, and we want to be part of it. Part of it, or in control of it? I asked, leading her through the busy corridors where our technology was helping save lives. Let's be direct, she said, stopping in front of a screen displaying our global healthcare network. We have the resources to take this model global, faster than you ever could alone. We're not the old guard. We understand the future is digital, collaborative, open. We just think it needs proper guidance. I had to admire her approach. It was more sophisticated than her parents' generation would have attempted. She wasn't trying to destroy what we'd built. She wanted to subsume it, guide it back toward centralized control through the subtle application of capital and influence. Look around this clinic, I told her. What do you see? She glanced at the busy medical staff, the patients receiving care, the technology seamlessly integrating with human expertise. I see a successful proof of concept, one that could be replicated thousands of times over with the right investment. That's where you're wrong, I replied. This isn't a proof of concept. It's proof that healthcare technology doesn't need guidance from the privileged few. Every innovation you see here was developed collaboratively. Every system improved by the people actually using it. That's not something you can buy or control. The world doesn't work on idealism, she argued. Someone always ends up in control. We're just being realistic about who that should be. No, I corrected her. You're being traditional about who that should be. The same way the Montgomerys were, the same way the Alliance was. You're still thinking in terms of control rather than creation. I pulled up our latest development data, showing her how healthcare innovations were emerging from unexpected places. Small clinics in developing nations, rural doctors solving local challenges, patients themselves contributing to better care solutions. This is what you're not understanding, I explained. We're not creating a new power structure for someone else to control. We're eliminating the need for that kind of control altogether. Catherine left the clinic visibly shaken, her carefully constructed plan confronting a reality she hadn't expected. Within days, Phoenix Global Innovations announced a strategic restructuring, corporate speak for abandoning their attempted takeover. But more importantly, several of their young board members reached out independently, wanting to learn more about our truly collaborative approach. They had seen something their parents never could, that the real power in the modern world didn't come from controlling innovation, but from enabling it. They'll try again, Diana predicted as we reviewed the aftermath. Maybe not these particular people, but someone will always want to control things. Let them try, I replied, watching as another successful surgery was completed using our systems. The world has seen what's possible when healthcare technology belongs to everyone. There's no going back to the old ways now. The 7th anniversary of that fateful family gathering brought an unexpected development. Eleanor's will had finally cleared probate, and her final letter arrived at my office. Inside was a revelation that would test everything I'd built. She knew, I told Diana, reading the carefully penned words. All those years ago, she knew the Montgomery Empire was built on stolen innovation, their first major breakthrough, the one that launched their real estate empire. It came from a developer who refused to sell. They didn't just pressure him. They destroyed him, made sure he could never build again. The letter contained detailed records, dating back decades, of how the Montgomerys had systematically appropriated others' innovations, crushed competitors, and built their empire on the ruins of others' dreams. But it was the final pages that truly shook me. They revealed that my own father's construction company, which had mysteriously failed when I was a child, had been one of their victims. That's why they chose you, Diana realized. They knew your background. They thought the daughter of a man they'd destroyed would be grateful for their acceptance, I finished. They never imagined I'd build something they couldn't take. The revelation added a new dimension to everything. My father's struggle, our family's sudden poverty, The years of watching him try to rebuild while mysterious obstacles appeared in his path. The Montgomerys hadn't just tried to steal my company, they had been destroying innovators for generations. But Eleanor's letter wasn't just confession, it was information. She had documented everything, including details about other families, still using the same tactics. The question was, what to do with this knowledge? We could expose them all, Diana suggested. Use the documentation to dismantle more than just the Montgomery legacy. Before I could respond, my assistant interrupted with urgent news. A major healthcare crisis had erupted in Southeast Asia, a rapidly spreading virus that was overwhelming local medical systems. Our open-source platforms were being deployed to coordinate responses, but something was interfering with implementation. Investigation revealed that several key medical facilities were being pressured to reject our systems in favor of traditional solutions. The pressure was coming from the same families named in Eleanor's documents. They're using a healthcare crisis to maintain control, Thomas reported, his voice tight with anger. People are dying while they play power games. The situation crystallized everything we'd been fighting for. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about life and death. The old system of controlled innovation and restricted access was literally costing lives. I made my decision. Upload everything, I instructed our tech team. Not just Eleanor's documents, all of it. Every instance we've documented of innovation being suppressed. Every case of technology being restricted for profit. Every life lost because someone decided healthcare was a privilege rather than a right. Are you sure? Diana asked. This goes beyond the Montgomerys. Some of these families are still powerful. That's exactly why it needs to be done, I replied. The system only works because it stays in the shadows. Let's show the world exactly how their power has been maintained and what it costs. We launched what we called the Transparency Initiative. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence was made public through our open-source platforms. But we didn't just expose the problems. We simultaneously released our entire healthcare technology framework, making it freely available to any facility that wanted to implement it. The impact was seismic. Hospitals and clinics worldwide began adopting our systems, ignoring pressure from traditional power structures. Medical professionals shared innovations freely, creating a cascade of improvements that no single controlled system could match. But the personal impact hit closer to home. My father, now retired, called after seeing the news. I always wondered what really happened, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All those years, watching other developers with half my experience succeed while I couldn't get a permit approved. Dad, I started, but he continued. But look what came of it. If they hadn't done what they did, would you have built what you built? Would you have understood what real power looks like? His words struck me. The Montgomerys had tried to break my father, just as they'd later tried to break me. But in both cases, they had inadvertently created something stronger than what they destroyed. In the midst of the crisis, I received another unexpected message from Marcus in prison. I saw the release, he wrote. I finally understand what you meant about power not being something you take. Real power multiplies when it's shared. The virus crisis was eventually contained, largely thanks to the unprecedented cooperation between medical facilities using our open platforms. But the real transformation was just beginning. The exposure of how traditional power structures had restricted innovation sparked a global conversation about access to healthcare technology. It's not just about healthcare anymore, Diana observed, as we watched news coverage of hospitals worldwide implementing our systems. You've changed how people think about power itself. Looking at the real-time data flowing across our screens, lives saved, innovations shared, barriers broken, I thought about Eleanor's letter and the legacy of destruction it had revealed. The Montgomerys thought power meant taking what others built, I said. But real power? Real power is building something that no one can take because it belongs to everyone. The 10th anniversary of my split from the Montgomerys arrived with an unexpected invitation. The World Health Organization was hosting a global summit on medical innovation, and they wanted to hold it at a symbolically significant location, the transformed Montgomery estate, now the world's leading center for collaborative healthcare development. As I prepared for the event, watching medical professionals from every corner of the globe file into what had once been the family's grand ballroom, I couldn't help but appreciate the poetry of the moment. The very space where Marcus had once tried to force me to sign away, my company was now hosting a celebration of shared innovation and open access to healthcare technology. "You might want to see this," Diana said, approaching with her tablet. The screen showed breaking news. The last of the major traditional healthcare conglomerates had announced their transition to open-source platforms. The old system of controlled innovation was officially dead, but it was the second news item that truly caught my attention. Marcus was being released from prison, his sentence complete. More surprisingly, he had already started working with healthcare initiatives in underserved communities, using his experience to help other facilities transition to collaborative systems. "He's requested to attend the summit," Diana added carefully. "As a participant, not a speaker. Says he wants to learn, not promote himself." The old Sarah might have refused out of spite or fear. The woman I'd become understood that true transformation sometimes required closing the most difficult circles. Accept his request, I decided, but have security keep a discreet eye on him. The summit opened with a powerful reminder of why our work mattered. Dr. Jung presented data showing how the democratization of healthcare technology had saved millions of lives in the past decade. Regions that had once been dependent on expensive, restricted systems were now developing their own innovations, sharing them globally, and improving care in ways the old model could never have achieved. But perhaps the most significant change, Dr. Jang concluded, isn't in the technology itself, but in how we think about innovation. The question is no longer, who owns this? But how can we make this better together? During a break-in, the presentations, I found myself in what had once been Richard's study. The wood-paneled walls and leather furniture had been replaced with transparent glass and collaborative workspaces. Where his imposing desk had once stood, a holographic display now showed real-time data from healthcare facilities worldwide. "It's quite a change," a familiar voice said behind me. Marcus stood in the doorway, older and grayer, but with a different kind of presence than I remembered. Gone was the entitled arrogance, replaced by something that looked almost like wisdom. "Why did you come?" I asked directly. He stepped into the room, looking at the data display. "Because I needed to see it. Not just what you built, but what you understood that we never did. Power isn't something you hold on to. It's something you set free." Before I could respond, urgent messages began flooding in. A massive earthquake had struck a remote region of Nepal, and medical facilities were being overwhelmed. But instead of chaos, we watched in real time as our global network sprang into action. Hospitals worldwide began coordinating responses, sharing resources, and deploying emergency protocols we'd developed through collaborative innovation. "This is it, isn't it?" Marcus said quietly, watching the emergency response unfold. "This is what real power looks like." The summit transformed into a real-world demonstration of everything we'd been fighting for. Medical professionals from different countries and cultures worked seamlessly together, using technology that belonged to everyone to save lives in a crisis. Traditional barriers of ownership and control had been replaced by a system of shared knowledge and rapid innovation. The emergency response continued. I received an unexpected message from Catherine Rothschild Chen, the young CEO who had once tried to co-opt our model. "You were right. Control isn't power. Creation is. Our resources are at your disposal for the relief effort." Later that evening, as the summit participants gathered for a closing reception in the estate's garden, I found myself reflecting on the journey. The Montgomerys had tried to break me that rainy night, believing that power came from forcing others to submit. Instead, they had sparked a revolution that showed the world a different kind of strength. "Dr. Patel was looking for you," Diana said, joining me in the garden. "The pilot program in rural India has exceeded all expectations. They're not just using our systems anymore. They're improving them, creating innovations we never thought of." I smiled, remembering how the Montgomerys had once dismissed my ideas about healthcare technology. That's the real victory, isn't it? Not just sharing what we built, but creating space for others to build something even better. Looking back at the estate, now illuminated with the soft glow of collaboration spaces and research labs, I could barely recognize the imposing mansion that had once represented everything wrong with concentrated power. Like me, it had been transformed into something entirely different, something that created rather than controlled, that shared rather than hoarded. Marcus approached one last time before leaving. "I understand now," he said simply. "Thank you for showing me what I couldn't see before." As he walked away, I turned to the next generation of innovators gathering in what had once been a symbol of exclusion and control. They weren't interested in owning innovation. They were focused on creating it, sharing it, making it better together. The Montgomerys had tried to teach me about power through force and fear. Instead, they had inadvertently helped me discover something far stronger: the power of setting innovation free. A year after the WHO summit, I received an intriguing request. A prestigious business school wanted to create a case study about the transformation of healthcare innovation, using the Montgomery story as its centerpiece. The professor leading the project had an interesting connection. She was Claire's daughter, Alexandra, now a leading expert in ethical business practices. "We want to document more than just the business aspects," Alexandra explained during our first meeting in what had once been Eleanor's private sitting room. "We want to understand the human elements that drive real change, the moment when someone chooses to build rather than destroy." The project sparked something unexpected: a deeper examination of how power structures transform across generations. Alexandra had gathered testimonies from children of other prominent families, all sharing similar stories of choosing a different path from their parents. "The most fascinating pattern," she noted, showing me her research, "is how many of us witnessed our parents' pursuit of control ultimately lead to their downfall. It wasn't just the Montgomerys. It was happening everywhere." Her words resonated with a truth I'd observed but never fully articulated. The next generation wasn't just choosing different business models. They were fundamentally reimagining what success looked like. Diana arrived with surprising news that gave Alexandra's research additional weight. Several of the young executives who had once been part of Phoenix Global Innovations had formed a new coalition, not to control healthcare technology, but to ensure it remained open and accessible. "They're calling it the Innovation Commons," Diana reported. "They're using their resources to protect and expand open-source healthcare development. It's like they've taken everything their parents fought against and turned it into their mission." The impact of this generational shift became clear during a global health emergency. When a new pandemic threatened to overwhelm medical systems worldwide, the response was dramatically different from anything seen before. Instead of companies competing to control treatments and technologies, there was unprecedented collaboration. I watched from our command center as young leaders whose parents had once epitomized closed, controlling business practices now championed open innovation and shared resources. The Montgomery estate, once a symbol of exclusion, had become the coordination hub for a global response effort. "You know what's remarkable?" Alexandra observed as we monitored the crisis response. "A decade ago, these families would have seen this as an opportunity to consolidate power. Now their children are seeing it as a chance to demonstrate the strength of collaborative innovation." The success of the pandemic response provided powerful validation of everything we'd built. But it was a personal moment that truly illustrated how much had changed. Marcus's son, who had been just a teenager during the original confrontation, arrived at the estate with his own contribution to the crisis response, a new diagnostic tool he'd developed and immediately made open source. "I learned from both of you," he told me, surprising me with his candor. "From my father's mistakes and your response to them. You showed me that real legacy isn't about what you keep for yourself. It's about what you give to the world." His words echoed through my mind as I reviewed Alexandra's case study draft. She had captured something profound about the nature of transformative change, how it ripples through generations, how one person's choice to respond to destruction with creation can shift the very foundation of how people think about power. The Montgomery name, once synonymous with controlled power and privilege, had been transformed into a symbol of collaborative innovation. But more importantly, the next generation had taken the lessons of our story and built something even more remarkable, a new understanding of what true strength looks like. As I walked through the estate's gardens, now filled with young innovators from around the world working on new healthcare solutions, I received a message from Diana. The last remaining restrictive patents in healthcare technology were being voluntarily released into the public domain. The transformation was complete. "It's a different world," Alexandra said, joining me in the garden. "And it started here, in this house, when you refused to submit to their version of power." I looked at the estate, remembering that rainy night when Marcus's slap had echoed through Richard's study. The Montgomerys had tried to teach me about power through force, but they had inadvertently helped create something far more powerful, a legacy of shared innovation that would continue long after all of us were gone. "The real victory," I told Alexandra, watching young developers collaborate on new healthcare solutions, "isn't in changing the past. It's in showing future generations a better way to build the future." 15 years to the day after that fateful family gathering, I stood in front of a different kind of assembly. The United Nations had convened a special session on the future of global healthcare, and our collaborative model had become the blueprint for a revolutionary international initiative. The session was being held in the transformed Heritage Tower, now the Global Innovation Center. The building that had once symbolized resistance to change had become a beacon of progressive healthcare development. But today's announcement would take everything we'd built to an unprecedented level. The Global Health Equity Initiative, Diana explained to the assembled representatives, will ensure that every medical innovation, regardless of where it's developed, becomes part of humanity's shared knowledge base. No more patents restricting access. No more artificial barriers to care. As she spoke, I noticed a familiar face in the audience, Richard Montgomery, released from prison 2 years ago, now notably aged. He had requested to attend, not as a participant, but as an observer. Beside him sat his grandson, Marcus's son James, who had become one of the leading advocates for open-source medical development. The contrast between generations was striking. Richard, once the patriarch of a family that hoarded power, sat quietly while his grandson presented data, showing how collaborative innovation had revolutionized healthcare delivery in underserved regions. During a break in the proceedings, Richard approached me. The years had stripped away his once imposing presence, leaving behind someone who seemed smaller, more human. "I've been watching," he said, his voice carrying none of its former authority. "Everything you've built, everything you've changed. I didn't understand it then, but I think I'm starting to now." Before I could respond, an urgent alert flashed across the center's screens. A massive earthquake had struck a region in Central Asia, threatening to overwhelm local medical infrastructure. But instead of panic, we watched something remarkable unfold. The global network we'd built sprang into action automatically. Hospitals worldwide began coordinating responses. Medical professionals from different countries started collaborating in real time. Innovation that would have once been restricted by patents and profit motives flowed freely to where it was needed most. This, I told Richard, gesturing to the screens showing the coordinated response. This is what real power looks like. Not controlling innovation, but setting it free to help whoever needs it. James joined us, tablet in hand, already coordinating. With development teams. "Grandfather," he said, "watch this." He pulled up a visualization showing how medical technologies were being adapted and improved in real time as different teams worldwide collaborated on emergency solutions. Richard's expression shifted as he watched the data flow. "All those years," he murmured. "We thought we were building something permanent by keeping control. But this is actually permanent, isn't it? Because it can't be controlled or taken away." The emergency response became a live demonstration of everything we'd been working toward. Teams that would have once competed were now collaborating seamlessly. Innovations that would have once been locked behind patents were being freely shared and improved upon. The old barriers of privilege and profit had been replaced by a system that valued impact over control. Later that evening, as the immediate crisis stabilized, I received an unexpected message. Eleanor's old social circle, the women who had once been the arbiters of high society, had transformed their annual charity gala into a funding initiative for global healthcare innovation. The very people who had once sneered at my lack of breeding were now championing the cause of accessible medical technology. "It's not just about healthcare anymore," Diana observed as we watched the pledges roll in. "You've changed how an entire generation thinks about power and success." She was right. The transformation hadn't just affected the business world, it had shifted cultural values. The next generation of privilege was choosing to measure their worth not by what they could control, but by what they could contribute. Looking out over the city skyline, I could barely recognize the landscape that had once been dominated by monuments to private power. The Montgomery estate was now a bustling innovation hub. The Heritage Tower housed collaborative research teams. Even the old social clubs had been repurposed into community healthcare centers. "Ms. Carter," my assistant interrupted my thoughts. "The UN Secretary General would like to discuss expanding the Global Health Equity Initiative to include artificial intelligence development." The request highlighted how far we'd come. The model of collaborative innovation that had started in healthcare was spreading to other sectors. The next generation wasn't just continuing what we'd built, they were expanding it in ways we hadn't imagined. Richard watched the proceedings with a mixture of bewilderment and dawning understanding. "We thought power meant making others depend on us," he said finally. "But real power is creating something that makes dependency obsolete." His words captured the essence of everything that had changed since that rainy night 15 years ago. The Montgomerys had tried to teach me about power through control and fear. Instead, they had inadvertently helped create a new kind of power, one that grew stronger the more it was shared. As the UN session concluded, I watched James lead a team of young innovators in developing new solutions for the earthquake-affected region. The next generation wasn't interested in the old questions of ownership and control. They were focused on a different question entirely. How can we make this better for everyone?